Good morning and welcome back to the vlog. We are in the garden this morning and I wanted to do a quick video on saving seeds. So I actually came out this morning to check on how a few things are doing, and we've got a handful of plants that are ready to collect seed. A lot of people see fall and winter coming and they clip back their gardens and they call it a day. But if you let your garden just grow, go through the cycle, kind of look a little bit dead and raggedy, you can actually collect seeds from a lot of your plants. I won't be able to collect everything today because some things might not be ready, other things I missed, but I will walk you through the process in case there are seeds ready to collect in your garden so you can gather them up and save them for next year. So what we're looking at right here are the seed heads from garlic chives. So we've got this chive bush coming out of the ground and then these stalks with these little flower bursts at the end. All through the late summer and early fall, these were these beautiful little white blooms. But the flower petals have started to die and you can see these little seed heads start to develop. So what I'm going to do is take some clippers and I'm just going to clip them right at the base of the seed head and collect them in a plastic bag. Now I could collect all of these, but I don't have a big enough bag right now, so I'm just gonna clip enough that I can stick them in a baggie and bring them inside to dry. They're a little bit wet because it's been rainy and wet recently, but we'll bring them inside, we'll lay them out to dry, and then we can split these little seed heads to pull the seeds out. I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but this is one of the seed heads that has split open. So you can see there are these little black seeds in there, and that's what we'll pluck out and save in an envelope to plant next year. When you are clipping the seed heads, you want to make sure you're looking for the seed heads that have some darkness to them. They start to look a little bit dried on the outside and you can see like the black of the seed showing through the paper around it. Some of these are a little bit more green, and if you actually crack these open, the seeds aren't ready yet. So make sure you're paying attention to how green or dry they are before you clip them, because these ones that are more green, those can wait a little bit longer before you go ahead and collect the seed. So now I have a baggie filled with seed heads. I'm not going to keep them in here because if you do, the moisture will cause them to mold and we don't want that. So this is just my storage bag while I'm collecting outside. If you have more of them, you can certainly use something like a larger bucket, but this is just easy enough for me to carry around. And then when we go inside, we will lay these out to dry to get rid of all of the moisture. These seed heads here are all black-eyed Susans. So this whole hill is covered with them in the summer. And I don't know if someone planted them here or if they just spread by birds or what, but it's gorgeous. And I want to do the same thing on the other side of this hill. So what I started doing is collecting these seed heads when they were dry. Now I already have a bucket filled with seed, but I will show you how I did it because it's super easy. And this is something fun for you to spread yourself, or you can share with friends. So again, you're just going to be looking for dead seed heads. Now, these should be pretty dead by now, but if they're not, you want to make sure they're completely brown and dried out. Once they are, you're just going to clip the seed head right at the base, and you'll collect these little seed heads in a bag or a bucket. Now, these are very wet, so they would definitely need to sit and dry out. When I collected them before, they were really dry and crunchy. So all I had to do was put them in a little bucket and shake the bucket, and all of the seeds just separated from the head itself. They're really tiny seeds and you can get a ton of them, especially if you have a whole hill of these flowers. So go ahead, clip your seed heads off, put them in a little baggie, especially if they're wet like this. You're going to want to bring them inside and let them dry out, and then once they're dry, you can shake off and separate all of the seed. Over at our dahlia bed, and a lot of these are still blooming, and that's great. We're going to maximize the bloom season, but some of these have started to die and go to seed. So again, we're looking for the really brown seed heads These green ones aren't quite ready yet, so there's still some time they need to develop the good seed. So just these like brown dead looking ones are what we will want to pick. Now the thing with dahlia seed is that they're in a bed of mixed colors and varieties. So the seed is not a direct replica of the plant itself. The tubers that grow underground, those are direct replicas of the plant that grew here. So when you collect the seed, it could be a mixed breed, it could have been pollinated from other flowers around it, so it will not necessarily look exactly like what you planted this year. That's kind of fun because you can get some really fun, beautiful mixes. So just keep that in mind when you're collecting the seed from these. If you want the exact replica of the plant, you need to dig up your tubers that are underground at the end of the season. All I'm going to do is gather my seed heads that are pretty brown. I'll leave these to continue, growing good seed, and I'll look for any other completely dead seed heads. We might not have a ton, so I'll probably have to come back and do this. The one thing I would recommend is keeping your seed heads separate. So if you're collecting seed heads from one variety, just keep those in their own bag so you kind of know which ones came from which plant. So these are super duper wet, so they're gonna have to dry out for quite some time before we can collect the seed, but that's okay. Lastly, I'm going to collect some zinnia seeds. So again, we're looking for the very dead flower heads. I still have plenty of zinnias blooming, which is awesome, but there are tons that have gone to seed already. So we're just gonna collect the dead ones in a bag. I shouldn't say dead, they're not technically dead. They've got a ton of seed there, so it's dead but in a good way. So we're going to collect the seed from these, and similar to the dahlias, the seed we collect from the zinnias won't be an exact replica of the flower that grew there. There are lots of other colors of zinnias around it, and if there were different varieties, it could be a mix of those. So keep that in mind. It's just a fun way to kind of explore and see what you can create with the seeds that have been pollinated. So I'm going to take all my baggies and bring them inside, and we will lay them out on a paper towel or a piece of cloth, something that will help wick away the moisture so that these can totally dry out and we can separate the seed. Okay, back inside, and I've got my baggies of seed heads here. So what I'm going to do is lay out some paper towels on the countertop, and I'm just going to spread each batch of seed heads out flat so they can completely dry. It might take a week or more. Some of these were pretty wet, so I'm just gonna keep an eye on them over the next several days. And once they're completely dry to the touch, like they're getting crumbly, then we can start to extract all of the seeds. If you have a dining room table like me that doesn't get used very often, that's a great place to put them. You just wanna make sure they're not in like a dark, moist area. Like I'm not gonna let them dry out in the basement. They might be fine, but I will probably keep them upstairs where I have more sunlight and the air is just a bit more dry. And actually, as I'm thinking about what I'm going to put them on, I'm going to put them on paper bags instead of paper towels. It will still help extract all of the moisture, but the paper bags are bigger and a little bit more rigid, so I can more easily move those if I need to get them out of the way while we're using the kitchen or the dining room table. So as you can see, this is a pretty simple process. I just cut my paper bag open and laid out each batch of seed heads totally flat so they're not overlapping and have an opportunity to completely dry out. We will come back and check on these in a week or so, and once they're totally dry, I'll show you how I pluck out all of the seeds. Now now been about a week since we collected our seed heads. Over the last week, I have let the seed heads dry on this open paper bag and just completely left them alone. It could take more or less than a week depending on how wet the seed heads are, but this morning I just kind of picked one up and started to break it apart to see if it was totally dry, and I think we're good to start collecting seeds. There are a lot of different ways to do this, and since I'm doing it on a small scale, I'm gonna do it all by hand. If you're collecting seed for a slightly larger quantity, still for like your own personal home, you can use bowls, or I use little tubs and things I save. Or if you're on a much larger scale, there's actually machinery that can help speed up this process for you. I'm just going to show you how to do it by hand because I'm only collecting seed that I'm going to use myself or gift to a few friends. So it's a much smaller quantity and it's totally manageable to do by hand. I would recommend having some seed packets nearby so you can collect these up, label them, and store them. I just use these little paper coin envelopes. You can order these on Amazon and you can get them in different sizes. Last year I got a smaller size, but I think for next year I'll probably order slightly larger ones. It is important that you're not storing your seeds in plastic because there still might be a little bit of moisture in them, and the paper envelopes will help wick that moisture away so the seeds don't mold over the course of the winter. As you collect the seed, I would put the name of the seed and the date you collected them on the envelope so you don't forget. Once you have a whole bunch of seed envelopes and you start collecting year after year, it's really hard to keep track. So help future you by labeling these with detail. On this side, we have our garlic chive seed heads, a few dahlias, and I picked some celosia after I stopped filming, so you didn't see me cut these, but these are just the flower heads, and they were starting to dry just like all the other things we collected, and I just clipped them and set them on the paper bag to dry out over the last week. So you can start to see here on the chive seed heads, they're starting to open up and you see all these black seeds. So those black seeds are what we're going to collect and save to plant next year. For the dahlias, we just have these little brown seed heads that are totally dry, and when we break these apart, we will find some seeds that look like this. The celosia is a bit fragile and the seed is already coming out, but you can kind of see along the flower head here, there are these little black dots, and all of those are seeds. And as this started to dry here on the paper, they've already started dropping, which I will show you. So the celosia seeds are super tiny, but there are tons of them. So even just from these two flower heads alone, we will be able to collect a ton of seed. So to keep this super easy and low effort, I'm just gonna start with the celosia because it's already started dropping a ton of seed. So I'm gonna shift the rest of these seed heads out of the way. And all I'm gonna do is take my celosia and just tap it lightly. And as I do this, these little seeds are starting to drop. You can even just like loosely kind of crinkle it. You don't want to push too hard because you don't want all this extra dry like flower petal stuff to fall into your seed. That's called chaff, and that's not anything viable. It just, you know, makes it harder to pick out the seeds. So just loosely rub your flower heads. You also don't want to do this too hard because you'll start to pull out seed that might not be viable. So anything that's really loosely dropping is probably more likely to be a viable seed than anything that's really stuck in there that might not be fully developed or isn't totally dry yet. So this is our pile of seed. You can see all these tiny little black seeds that look like poppy seeds, and then all of these little white flower petals that are essentially just chaff. And we want to separate those so that we can collect all the black seed and put them into an envelope. So I've got a little bowl here, and very carefully I'm just going to kind of like pick up on the pad of my finger the seeds and drop them into the bowl. If I was doing this on a larger scale, what you can do to separate the chaff is put these all in a larger bowl or a bucket and just blow lightly, and all of this light fluffy chaff will just blow out and you'll be left with the viable seed. I'm in my kitchen, so I don't want to make a mess, so I'm just doing this by hand, it will take a little bit longer, but I don't have that much seed to collect, so that's okay. So now you can see I've collected all these tiny little black seeds. There's a tiny bit of chaff, but it's okay. It's just for me. It's not something I'm selling. And I'm gonna put these into an envelope and I'll label the envelope so that I can save them and plant them next year. Now all this chaff and any of the little bits of seed that we haven't collected can just be put right into the compost and it'll break down and we can put it back into future garden beds. So now we'll take a look at the garlic chives. You can see that all these little seed heads had started to pop open. So all I'm gonna do is kind of like roughly tap it on my hand so that those seeds will start to pop out. You might have to kind of like rub the seed heads against one another. These are not quite as loose as the celosia, so it's a little bit harder to like separate them, but they will come out with a little extra convincing. And again, you don't want to go too hard because you don't want to get things that either aren't ready yet or aren't viable seed or create more chaff that you have to like pick the seed out of. So some of them might not be open and that's okay. You can set that to the side and then do the same thing for the next one. These seeds are a little bit bigger, so they're slightly easier to work with. You'll know that the seed head is pretty clear once most of the black seeds are gone. So if nothing else is releasing, you can set it to the side. Now all of this can go right into the compost, and this is all of our seed and chaff. So I'm gonna scoop it into a pile. Give it a light blow to separate the black seeds, and then I'm going to collect these in my bowl. Now for the dahlias, again, I only picked the heads of one variety. So if you're doing multiple different varieties, you want to make sure you keep them separate so you know where the seeds came from. So these heads were pretty wet when I picked them and they're now totally dry. They're much lighter and they're very crumbly. So what you can start to do is kind of peel back these loose layers. And as you start to do that, you're gonna see seeds pop out. It's kind of deceiving, but the seeds are tucked in between all of these layers of dried petals. So I'm just carefully peeling everything apart. Like with everything, there's a bunch of seed in here mixed with the chaff. If you look very closely, mixed in these little petals, you might see some dark seeds that look like this. Now, they're not all going to be viable. And I don't know that all of them are totally formed, like any of these smaller ones. So I would say just keep your eye open for anything that looks like a fully formed seed, is a bit darker and like more robust than some of these other little bits of chaff, and set those aside. If you don't see a lot of seed, I wouldn't be alarmed. It might not have fully developed, it might not have been ready yet when we picked it. So if you don't see a ton of what looks like seed, just go ahead and move on to the next one. Next, I'm going to do the Black-Eyed Susans. Now, you can certainly do what we've been doing and kind of break the seed head apart and pick the seeds out by hand. But the Black-Eyed Susan seeds are very small and there's a lot of them. So what I like to do, and what I already started doing this year, is I take all of my totally dried seed heads and I plop them in a little jar or a bucket, something that's big enough that there's space for them to move around, but small enough that you can kind of hold on to it and shake it by hand. So I plop all my seed heads in there, and then I just shake. Now, obviously I don't have a top on this. You certainly could put a top on it and just like shake it like crazy. By doing this, you're just shaking all the seeds loose and it will make the cleanup much easier. Anything that's loose in the seed head will fall out. Anything that's not, either you can pluck it out by hand or just call it a loss. It might not be viable either. So now that we've done a good shake, I'm gonna take all the seed heads out, and actually if you look at them, there's really very little seed left in the seed head. All of this is seed. There's tons of it. This is the perfect flower to spread in a field or on a hillside, because you can get so much seed from, you know, just a handful of seed heads. Now, I'm not gonna go crazy. There's still a little bit of chaff in the mix here, but that's a much easier process, and basically we're done with the Black-Eyed Susans. Because this is so big, I will definitely need to split it into multiple envelopes or put it in a larger like mailing envelope, still paper so that it's breathable, but there's tons of this and I would fill a lot of those coin envelopes with just this alone. Last but not least are the zinnias we picked. So you can see all the petals that were on the edges are totally dry. And once we peel those petals back, we are seeing all of these seeds in the middle. Now this is somewhat similar to the dahlia, where you want to leave the cone intact, that's that middle piece. But if you just kind of pull all those petals off the outside, you will start to find these flat, oval-shaped seeds. So they do look a lot like the dahlias. And what you're gonna do is just sort through your pile very carefully and pluck out those seeds. Again, you could put this into a pile or a bowl and blow out all the chaff, but I like to do it by hand because I'm only doing a handful of these and I don't want to make a mess. So these are a bit larger, easier to grab with your fingertips, and I'll just collect them in this bowl. So we're definitely getting more seeds than we did with the dahlias because these are slightly larger seed heads, but you can see we've got quite a few here. So I'm going to finish up the rest of these seed heads and then we will pop these in an envelope. So now we have 4 envelopes and a whole bucket filled with different seeds we collected from our own garden. Now, these can be split up into smaller envelopes and given to friends and family, and it will go quite a long way. There's a lot of seeds in here, and even just giving someone 10 seeds will help them grow their garden, which they can collect seeds from the next year. So it's a really fun gift idea, and it's a really easy way to continue building your own garden with things that you love. I hope you found this video helpful and you feel empowered to go out in your garden and collect seeds from some of your favorite plants. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer, and I will leave a link to these envelopes in the description below. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future updates, and I will catch up with you in the next video.